All right, guys, I want to get to a very intriguing story about how these conference realignment deals actually get done. Major, network influence with Fox Sports and ESPN. We've also got some transfer portal numbers coming out. Really interesting stuff there, but take a look at this. How college football realignment deals stay secret, and should they be? You can take a look. On June 30th, USC and UCLA submitted formal applications to join the Big Ten, and school presidents unanimously approved their applications the same day. A source involved in the Big Ten's discussion with USC estimated only about 10 people at the school were aware of talks until a week before, when preparations for the announcement began. So guys, this is another situation where it came out of complete nowhere. I mean, last year we heard and we saw Oklahoma and Texas going to the SEC. That came out of nowhere. But after that, there was this question: what would the Big Ten do in response? Nobody was saying anything, and then out of nowhere, we get the major thing. The biggest surprise to me on that whole thing was that it got kept quiet. Iowa's coach said a year ago the bombshell news that Texas and Oklahoma were joining the SEC, adding two of the strongest brands to college football. And then this is the interesting point. The USC and UCLA situation was completely done by Fox. That's coming from the former commissioner of the Big 12. And apparently that's just his opinion. He says, let's face it, TV is running college football these days. No matter what disclaimer you get, you know damn well ESPN was supporting the SEC grabbing Oklahoma and Texas the same way Fox was involved in the Big Ten getting these two LA schools. So this is all revenue based, and this is mainly orchestrated by these TV networks. And we know how obsessed Fox Sports is with the Big Ten, and we know they're going to be getting a major TV deal. So the influence Fox has, the influence ESPN has, is significant, and it's part of the reason why these, or honestly, the main reason these deals get done, along with overall money. If you're USC, if you're UCLA, what is the incentive to join the Big Ten all the way on the other side of the country? It's the TV deal. It's the revenue. What's the incentive of Oregon, of Washington possibly trying to get into the Big Ten? None of these things geographically make any sense. It's all based on money. This is all being run by these TV deals. All of it. When you think about it, Texas, Oklahoma, that was even rumored like months ago that was something that ESPN was pushing heavily for, and the incentive remains all around revenue. So when you see stuff like this, it's not surprising at all that Fox Sports was involved. That's the main reason you would do it, because it makes no sense otherwise. Of course, they'll say, oh, you get more important matchups, whatever. That, we could have had a very fine college football ecosystem with a 12-team or a 16-team playoff where you keep the Pac-12 together. And the Pac-12 is getting better with USC, with Lincoln Riley. Utah's been, improving a little bit. Oregon has the Nike money with NIL, so they're getting better. But the main reason and the main incentives of these moves, as said, this intel, this article, it's all based off of the TV deals. And that's what's going to drive these schools to do certain things. Nothing else really matters. It doesn't have to make sense. USC playing Rutgers in conference doesn't make any sense, but it doesn't matter because they're getting paid a lot more money to join the Big Ten. And of course, the Big Ten, it makes sense from their standpoint to add two lucrative programs. That's kind of the whole hang-up we've seen with Oregon. The Big Ten is sitting back saying, wait a minute, if we're not getting more money, more revenue per school from Oregon joining our conference, what's the point in bringing them on? So that's why we're seeing a hang-up there with Oregon trying to get into the Big Ten, but we expect them to just sit back, stay in the Pac-12 for a few years, try and get that TV deal done, possibly with ESPN or whoever they're going to get it done with the zero exit fee. So Oregon theoretically could go to the Big Ten at any point should the Big Ten and the SEC both go through another expansion, possibly to 20 teams, which is the evolution we all expect, well, or some people expect over the next few years. The SEC to 20 teams, the Big Ten to 20 teams, and then the Big 12. It's kind of a wild card in all of this, but there is the thought you get the 3 super conferences. So looking at this, the 2021-2022 transfer cycle apparently ended yesterday. I didn't know there were set dates on when it ends. Good news, more than 80% of FBS scholarship players have found homes. And there's some major stats, and there's this interesting, actually, I don't even think it's that interesting, but it is a graph to show the overall data of the 2021-2022 transfer portal year. You can see quarterbacks and running backs, transferring at a similar rate, a lot more receivers and a lot more defensive backs. Of course, that makes sense because defensive backs, you're talking about safeties, you're talking about nickel backs, you're talking about cornerbacks, fewer tight ends, and then there is a disturbing report on offensive linemen, which is going to be a major issue for Ohio State because if Paris Johnson Jr. plays as well as we think he's going to, Ohio State is very likely going to need a portal offensive lineman. Here's an oversimplified way of summing it all up. The average Power 5 program lost 16 transfers in the... Is that true? The average Power 5 program... that is a lot of roster turnover. While 14 of them found a new home, 9 of them going to a group of 5 program or lower, that's not necessarily a bad thing. Those players often have a better chance to start when you go down to a group of 5 team, of course. But the one thing I want to point out, and this is kind of the new trend, we've seen teams like Alabama, because there still is a scholarship limit, even kids in the 2021 class, Alabama, what I think is happening, they're going to kids, they're watching them in practice. Maybe it's a 3-star guy on scholarship who's only a freshman, and they're going to these kids and saying, listen, we're going to be honest with you. You're not good enough to play here. You're not going to start here. You're going to be a backup. Transfer to another program. Allow that scholarship to open up. I think there's either 2 or 3 players from Alabama's 2022 class that have already transferred out of their program because Alabama looks at those players in practice, they recognize they're not good enough, they don't want them theoretically wasting a scholarship, and it's also in the kid's best benefit because you're telling the kid, listen, you're not going to play here, you can transfer, be immediately eligible through the portal, and go start for a group of 5 team. There's so much more roster turnover, there's so much more competitiveness, and you're going to see schools like Alabama, like Georgia, take a lot less 3-stars. I think there was something like Alabama had 1 3-star commit last year or something, as opposed to a combination of 25 or 26 4 and 5 stars. Very similar this year. The 3-stars they're almost a thing of the past for these extremely elite recruiting programs. Now, this is not a good data point here with Ohio State needing offensive linemen. It says great offensive linemen can be hard to find in the portal. It's easy to look at the transfer market in terms of supply and demand. There were 158 FBS scholarship quarterbacks who entered the portal in the past year. There are only 131 FBS programs. Only 1 guy can be a starter. If you were in the market for a new QB, so there's a lot of quarterbacks available. Now, if you're hoping to fortify your offensive line with some new starters out of the portal, best of luck to you. A total of 241 FBS scholarship offensive linemen chose to transfer. That might sound like a big number, but it really isn't. If you combine the backs and receivers, for example, there were twice as many so that is not a good sign because Ohio State is going to be heavily relying, very likely, on the transfer portal next year for an offensive tackle. Of course, all it takes is 1 elite offensive tackle hitting the portal, and Ohio State selling him on the position. But if you're a program like Ohio State, you don't want to be in the position where you're relying on the portal to facilitate your needs and facilitate a starter, which it looks like Ohio State might be doing depending on what happens with Paris Johnson Jr. at the offensive tackle position. Of course, we've seen the Alabama strategy, which is just get a superstar running back, superstar DB, and a really good wide receiver. And it's just like Nick Saban is using the portal, kind of as a free agency type system where we're just going to take whatever we need, get the best player available. They got the best DB, Eli Ricks. They got Gibbs, who was a solid 4-star, top 50 overall player from Georgia Tech. A lot of people look at that running back and think, he's from Georgia Tech. That kid's a beast, guys. And a lot of people do know he is really good. And then they get Burton, the receiver from Georgia, because they had a little bit of a receiver question mark with Mechie leaving, with Jameson Williams leaving, things like that. So we're seeing these programs use the transfer portal as kind of a feeder free agency system to get their main team needs addressed. But according to the data, offensive linemen transfer at a lot less of a rate than other positions like defensive back, for example. So it could be tough trying to find one of those. We've got a mock of the future I can't even keep these, this, I don't even know what this is. This is the future American with Washington State, Oregon State, Boise State, San Diego State. I don't even know. What is this, 20 teams? They do this a lot of times where it's just random stuff. I don't even know what I'm looking at, honestly. But this would be a situation where the Pac-12 would implode. And I don't see any way, just in my opinion, Washington State and Oregon State specifically join the American Conference. I think for Washington State and Oregon State, you're either staying in a crappy Pac-12 or you would be headed to the Mountain West. Those two schools fit the Mountain West extremely well, in my honest opinion. So we'll see what happens there. You can see this is an Instagram thing from CFBN Plus, and they have a lot of these different ones. Some of them are more realistic. This one, not very realistic. The other thing to note, talking about that first article, so they made sure to emphasize that those realignment deals are very secretive. If there is more realignment, I think it happens this week or maybe next week, and then after that, we're done for the season, and then everyone focuses on the season and things like that, and then the questions start up again next off season. Mainly, I think the big thing to watch actually right now, if nothing happens in terms of realignment with the Big 12 and the Pac-12, the big thing to watch is that playoff meeting between the commissioners that's happening in mid-August, where I think they will make the announcement to expand the playoff possibly as early as 2024, probably in 2025. And they're really talking about getting a format down. Possibly the 12-team format is what I expect. It's going to come down to either the 12-team or the 16-team. So we will see what happens there. But guys, that is the latest update. And again, guys, it's Fox. It's these major TV networks that are really driving all of this realignment. The incentive is based on these TV deals. If you're USC, if you're UCLA, and you're being offered $100 million more per year, which is what they stand to make going to the Big Ten. Well, actually, it's less, because if they would have stayed in the Pac-12, the Pac-12 would have gotten a better media deal. So it's less than $100 million, but it's like $60-70 million more going to the Big Ten, which is the overall numbers we expect. That's what drives this situation. It's all about the money. It doesn't matter. Competitive balance does not matter. That's why this situation is where it is. That's why we're completely in a tailspin right now and going out of control with the realignment. There's a few different things you can say. When the SEC, who is already the best conference in college football, adds Oklahoma and Texas, you're pretty much out of control at that point. But geographically, it could kind of fit in the SEC footprint. Now we've got schools from California joining the Big Ten, and we're completely off the rails. It is what it is, guys. We'll see what happens next. Make sure you're following me on Twitter. Link to that's always in the description. I'm, of course, the Depressed Ginger. Thank you for watching.